In today's episode, we've got the ocean blue, a bunch of nothing, and a guy named Pfefferkorn. It's time for your Jewish week. Hey everyone, welcome to Your Jewish Week, the podcast for everything Jewish in the week ahead. I'm Rabbi Dovey. As always, this podcast is produced by Chabad.org and dedicated to all our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land. May Hashem keep them safe from all harm, and may all the hostages finally be freed to return to their families and loved ones. Before we get started today, I just wanted to let all of you know that we've been making some updates to the podcast on the technical side. The show notes are now visible on all podcast platforms, or at least they should be, and we've improved our bookmarking feature so you can skip to the part of the podcast that you're most interested in. Or, of course, you can listen to the whole thing to get the maximum Your Jewish Week goodness. Thank God the podcast viewership has been growing. If you're enjoying Your Jewish Week and want to help us out, consider leaving a 5-star review or a positive comment on whatever platform you're listening on, and of course, sharing the podcast with a friend. Back to your regularly scheduled programming. Today is Sunday, the 12th of Sivan, and if you happen to be spending Shabbat on the island of Mauritius, home of the famous dodo bird, you'll find Shabbat candlelighting time coming in at 5:20 p.m., which is quite early. Just don't expect to find any dodo birds there, as they have sadly been extinct for over 300 years, which is a real shame because based on the pictures, they were quite cute. If you're anywhere else in the world, halachic times for your location can be found quickly and easily at Chabad.org/times. And if you'd like to suggest a location for us to give Shabbat times for next week, feel free to let us know in the comments. Starting us off, as always, with the weekly Torah portion, this week we'll be reading the Parsha of Behaloscha. Sunday, we'll start off with the lighting of the menorah in the Mishkan every day. The menorah was a bit different from our Hanukkah menorahs. It had only 7 branches, it was roughly my height, and it was made of pure gold. Then going into Monday, we're going to transition into the process of initiating the Levites in their roles as stewards of the Mishkan. They had to immerse themselves, offer certain sacrifices, and of course, shave their entire bodies. It is an initiation, after all. Tuesday, we'll learn about Pesach Sheni, the second Passover, which we covered about a month ago on this podcast. We'll have the story of how the second Passover became a thing and go over some of the laws associated with it. Wednesday, we'll describe how Hashem's divine cloud acted as a kind of signal, telling the Jews when to travel and when to make camp. We'll also talk about the 2 silver trumpets that Moshe was instructed to make. They looked kind of like vuvuzelas, those long plastic horns people bring to soccer games, only they were much more expensive and presumably didn't sound as obnoxious. Moshe used the trumpets for signaling gatherings, certain sacrifices, travel, and going to war. The message depended on the type of noise he blew. Thursday, it's back to narrative mode. After a little under a year camped by Mount Sinai, the Jews pack up and head out by Hashem's command. All except Yisro, Moshe's father-in-law, who heads back to his hometown of Midian to convert his family members to Judaism. Friday is going to be a busy one. We'll have the Jews complaining pretty much as soon as they start moving. This time it's because the journey was too hard, and then when they're done with that, it's because the mun was too bland. You'll recall the mun was the miraculous bread that falls from the sky every day and tastes like pretty much whatever you want, but that's not good enough for them. They want meat. Well, they get plenty of meat, but not quite the way they had in mind. That's going to be in Shabbat's reading. Also on Shabbat, we'll tell the story of Miriam, the sister of Moshe, who questioned one of Moshe's decisions with regards to his personal life. Now, this was in private between her and her brother Aaron, and they had nothing but the good of Moshe in mind, but they were still both punished quite severely. And the reason for this is because divine punishment works kind of on a sliding scale. Regular people like you and me have kind of a certain margin of error. Our actions aren't examined as minutely. I mean, we're human, right? We all make mistakes. But towering figures like Miriam and Aaron and Moshe himself, for that matter, are so nearly perfect, so utterly in control of themselves that even the slightest shade of a misdeed stands out quite a bit. In the case of Miriam, she was afflicted with tsaras, spiritual leprosy, for an entire week. But even in her punishment, she was still given an enormous honor. The entire Jewish people paused their journey and remained camped in place, waiting until her period of impurity was up. Only when she rejoined the camp did they depart again. Parshas Beha'aloscha contains 136 verses, with the memory key being the name Mehalalel, which is about as close as a Hebrew name gets to becoming Hawaiian. As always, check out the link in the show notes for more insight into this week's keys. In the weekly Tanya, we left off last week on a question. If Hashem is truly all that is, and the world is just a bunch of nothing, why doesn't it look like a bunch of nothing? Seems pretty something to me when you look at it. So this week we're going to get to answering that question. And the basic thrust of the answer is, it's all a big conspiracy. Hashem is indeed all that exists, but he hides that fact in order to give us the opportunity to feel like we exist, which I think is pretty nice of him. If you're still confused, that makes sense. The Alter Rebbe points out that just as it's impossible for us to comprehend the full intensity of Hashem's presence, it's also impossible for us to comprehend the magnitude of his concealment, how much he holds back and hides himself. These two characteristics, the intense expression of Hashem's presence and conversely his ability to withhold it, are associated with the attributes of kindness and severity respectively. They're also identified with two different divine names. We mentioned before on this podcast that Hashem is called by many names. Each one reflects one of the many facets of himself that he makes known to us. So the attribute of kindness and expression is associated with the name that's spelled Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. That's the name we never pronounce phonetically. We usually just call it Havaya for simplicity's sake. And severity is associated with the name Elokim. Towards the end of the week, we're going to tie it all together. We'll revisit a verse that the Alter Rebbe mentioned earlier. In that verse, the Torah admonishes us to know and take to heart that Havaya is Elokim. Now, taken simply, the verse is telling us to always know that Hashem is the one true God. But now that we understand the implications of those divine names, the hidden meaning becomes clear. Both Havaya and Elokim, Hashem's ability to express his presence and his ability to conceal it to make our existence possible, both of those are truly one. They're all facets of a single, indivisible, sublime unity. Pretty philosophical, but very meaningful once you really take some time to marinate in the ideas, which is why I once again encourage you to all go learn it for yourselves. Probably want to use one of the classes offered by Chabad.org for these sort of complicated chapters. Moving on to the daily Rambam, the 3-chapter and Sefer HaMitzvos tracks are moving on to the laws of kosher and ritual slaughter. We'll spend the week going over the qualifications for a trusted slaughterer and various injuries that can make an animal treifa, terminally wounded, in which case the meat is unkosher. You may have heard the colloquial term treif to describe anything that isn't kosher. This comes from this concept. It just kind of got colloquially extended to all non-kosher things. Thursday, we'll cover a couple other laws that are relevant to slaughtering, sending away the mother bird before taking the eggs, not slaughtering a mother and her calf on the same day, and covering the blood of a slaughtered animal. Before moving on to the 6th book of Mishnah Torah, it's called Sefer Hafla. You can translate it as the book of pronouncements or utterances. Basically, it's all about verbal obligations like oaths and pledges. We'll start off with the laws of oaths, covering the definition of an oath, what happens if you break one, and how they can be annulled. And of course, continuing into next week because we are just getting started. In the 1-chapter track, we're discussing the laws of an accidental killer who must be exiled to one of the designated cities of refuge to atone for the blood guilt he bears, and to protect him from the victim's relatives who are legally empowered to kill him extrajudicially. Now, this doesn't apply to all accidental killers. If the killer was grossly negligent, he doesn't get the protection of the city of refuge. And on the other end of the spectrum, if it was a completely unforeseeable freak accident, he's completely innocent. So the whole city of refuge concept only really applies to cases that are right in the middle. We'll learn how to establish that in Monday's reading with additional laws Tuesday and Wednesday. Thursday, we're on to a new set of laws on kind of a similar vein, the laws of Egla Arufa, the beheaded calf. If a traveler is found dead on the road, we measure from the corpse to determine which major city is the closest, and that city has to supply a calf to be beheaded in a special ritual. And the general reason for this kind of tribal-sounding procedure is not unlike the exile of the accidental killer we learned about in the beginning of the week. The loss of a human life creates a certain imbalance, a certain blood guilt, which falls on the responsible party. In the case of the Egla Arufa, some responsibility falls on the entire city because they didn't provide adequate food and protection for the traveler. And this idea is something that used to be pretty widely accepted, even by other cultures. Just in the past century or so, we all got too modern and smart for all that superstitious stuff, which has clearly been great for society. Anyway, the Torah provides a method of expiating this guilt and restoring balance, and we'll learn about that Thursday and Friday. On Shabbat, we'll learn about the obligation to build a fence around your roof to make sure nobody falls off and hurts themselves, as well as several other safeguards the Torah mandates in order to avoid danger. All very interesting stuff, which you should definitely go check out for yourself. As always, if you'd like to learn more about anything you just heard, or if you're ready to join one of the daily study cycles, check out the show notes for links and resources. All right, with the weekly overview done, it's time to take it day by day. Sunday, the 12th of Sivan, is our last day skipping the Tachnan portion in our daily prayers. Starting tomorrow, we're back on as usual. Sunday also marks the yahrzeit of Reb Shaul Dovber Zislin, a prominent chassid in modern-day Belarus and later the Holy Land in 1964. There's a very cute story about Reb Shaul Dovber, which you can find on Chabad.org. I'll attach a link to it in the show notes, but briefly, Reb Shaul Dovber once attended a city council meeting in the town of Shedrin, where he served as a Hasidic mentor. A charity collector had come to town to raise money for a worthy cause, and at this meeting it was decided that a certain Reb Peretz, a very respected member of the community, should accompany this collector on his rounds to kinda encourage the community to donate. Now, apparently, Reb Peretz wasn't too keen on this plan, so he made a very generous estimate of how much the entire community would donate in total and offered to just pay the whole sum upfront, save everyone the trouble, including himself. So it seemed like a pretty solid plan, but then Reb Shaul Dovber got up and started describing how the Evil Inclination's business model works. And this is what he said. When this charity collector came to town, the Evil Inclination started going crazy. His job is to stop Jews from doing good deeds, and along comes this guy. Before you know it, he'll have all the Jews in the town giving charity. It's a crisis. It's an unacceptable strain on the Evil Inclination's resources. He's going to have to simultaneously talk hundreds of Jews out of giving charity. It's a worst-case scenario. It's his version of an impending market crash. So the Evil Inclination calls an emergency board meeting and comes up with a brilliant strategy. Get the city council to have a meeting and nominate Reb Peretz to give the entire sum, and then his job becomes exponentially easier. Instead of convincing several hundred Jews not to give, all he has to do is convince Reb Peretz. Tuesday, the 14th of Sivan, we've got an interesting episode from our history, and it all starts with a dude, I kid you not, named Pfefferkorn. Pfefferkorn. There's a P and an F. Pfefferkorn. And the greatest thing about this, by the way, is if you look him up, he looks exactly like you'd expect someone named Pfefferkorn to look. Kind of pouty lips, double chin, page boy bangs, and a stodgy little medieval academic cap thingy. Anyway, this Pfefferkorn guy was a Jew who sadly left his faith, and like many Jews who make similar life choices, he did his best to prove his loyalty to his new Gentile friends by out-Gentiling them. And as part of that effort, he convinced Emperor Maximilian of Germany to burn all Jewish books in the cities of Cologne and Frankfurt due to their supposedly heretical contents. This took place in 1509. The Jews appealed the decree, and on this day in 1510, the German scholar Reuchlin presented a report to the crown that Pfefferkorn's claims were pretty much baseless, and the edict was rescinded. As a postscript, this event sparked a war between Pfefferkorn and Reuchlin, and for the next couple years, they duked it out in the 16th century equivalent of Twitter, pamphleteering. Basically, they wrote pamphlets back and forth, each describing how the other was stupid, which I find hilarious. And even more hilarious is the names of the pamphlets. So let me set the stage for you here. First, Pfefferkorn fired off his classic work, Handspiegel, to which Reuchlin hit back with his own Augenspiegel. But it wasn't long before Pfefferkorn was back with the Sturmglück, to which Reuchlin's students responded by making the jump into Latin and hammering Pfefferkorn in the Epistolae Obscurorum Virorum. Not to be outdone, Pfefferkorn responded with the most epically long-winded title of them all, and I promise you this is real, Defensio J. Pepericorni contra famosas et criminales obscurorum virorum epistolas. See? Just people living in the moment, not a phone to be seen. Wednesday, the 15th of Sivan, is a very happy birthday to Yehuda, the son of our forefather Yaakov in 1565 BCE, and also a very happy yahrzeit to him as well, 119 years later. Yehuda was the fourth out of 13 siblings, but he rose to prominence as the leader of them all. This was later solidified by their father, who promised Yehuda on his deathbed that the royal lineage will always be from his descendants. Eventually, the entire Jewish people became known as Yehudim after Yehuda, and the word Jew also comes from Yehuda or Judah. The previous Rebbe actually points out an interesting trend when it comes to the nomenclature of the Jewish people. We've been called by lots of different names, but in particular, we used to be called Ivrim. Avraham, our forefather, was known as Avram the Ivri, and during the famous story of Jonah and the whale, Jonah identified himself with the words Ivri Anochi, I am an Ivri. And that was really the prevalent term. But eventually, Ivri started to lose its meaning, At a time in history when large swaths of Jews were assimilating, Ivri became a sort of cultural marker. It no longer represented a unique role and bond with Hashem, it was just a national identity, a tribal affiliation. That's when the term Yehudi really became popular. The name Yehuda itself comes from the word Hoda, which connotes submission and humility. Identifying yourself as a Yehudi meant that you submitted yourself to Hashem and rejected idolatry and other false belief systems. This was exemplified by Mordechai, the leader of the Jewish people during the times of Purim and the hero of the Megillah, who famously refused to bow to Haman despite intense pressure to do so. From the moment he's introduced to us in the Megillah, he's identified as Ish Yehudi, a Yehudi man, someone who submits to Hashem and rejects the false gods like Haman and all the rest. So I think Wednesday, as Yehuda's birthday and yahrzeit, is an opportunity for us to take a moment and think about our role as Jews, as Yehudim, in our modern world. Like the Yehudim throughout history, we too are called to stand up to the pressures in our own lives and declare our loyalty to Hashem above all else. Speaking of standing up to pressure, the 15th of Sivan 1927 was the night that the previous Rebbe of Chabad was arrested by agents of the Soviet secret police. This was not the first time the Rebbe had been arrested for his activities keeping Judaism alive in the Soviet Union, but it was definitely the most severe. His life was threatened in a very immediate way, and when he was miraculously released on the 12th of Tammuz, the joy was on another level. We'll cover that all on the podcast when we get there, God willing, in a little over a month. Thursday, the 16th of Sivan, marks the yahrzeit of Rebbetzin Freda, the daughter of the Alter Rebbe. Now, the Alter Rebbe, being the founder of Chabad and the author of the Tanya, you'd expect his children to all be something really special, but Rebbetzin Freda was known to be extraordinary. Her father described her as possessing a soul from the level of Ma, which is usually associated with a Rebbe, and he would often say Hasidic discourses exclusively for her, which is extraordinarily rare. Rebbetzin Freda passed away in 1813, not long after her father, and was buried close to him in the city of Haditch. And finally, Shabbat, the 18th of Sivan, marks a significant event in the history of the one thing that no one ever expects, the Spanish Inquisition.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition!
Now, you might recall that the Jews were kicked out of Spain in 1492 and had to find themselves new places to live, sometimes on the other side of the ocean blue. From that day, practicing Judaism was officially outlawed in Spain. Now, obviously, that isn't the case anymore, as evidenced by the fact that there's like 7 Chabad houses across Spain, and nobody really expected that law to still be in effect in the modern day. But have you ever wondered exactly when it was officially repealed? No need to Google it, I'll just tell you. It was the 18th of Sivan, 1967. Yes, 1967, in living memory of thousands of Jews who are still alive today. And I think this brings us to an important point that isn't always easy to realize. The world is doing very, very well. I was recently at a Hasidic gathering with Rabbi Marcus, the rabbi in the next town over from us in Mission Viejo, and he really laid out this point for me in a way I hadn't thought of before. We live in an extremely televised time. Everything that's happening in the world, particularly the bad things, are beamed at us directly 24 hours a day. And sometimes when you're living in that kind of environment, it's hard to take a step back and look at the broad trend to kind of get a sense where the world is heading and where we stand. But when you make an effort to do that, you'll very quickly realize that we are living in unprecedentedly good times by every metric. Put it this way, next time someone complains about the state of the world, ask them, when would they rather live? Like literally, pick any time, any era, when would you rather live? That would be seriously preferable to the modern day. Just to pick one example, when was it ever a thing in human history that war was widely understood to be a bad thing? That mistreating prisoners was widely understood to be a bad thing. I mean, you go back thousands of years ago, people were writing on the walls, bragging about all the enemies they tortured horribly and killed, and all the glorious conquest they engaged in. There's been a sea change in the way people think, and it's happening slowly, almost imperceptibly, but at the same time, it's happening recently. I mean, the ordinance of the Spanish Inquisition was literally the law of the land in Spain until 1967. And the reason for this, as the Rebbe has told us many times, is that we're getting closer to Mashiach. And the closer we get, the more his presence is felt in the world. Even as we wait for him to finally reveal himself and take us out of exile, his influence is already starting to mold the world, to bring it into closer alignment with the way it will be in the final redemption. Certain people love talking about anti-Semitism, and it's definitely a concern that needs to be addressed. But have you ever considered how much better it is, even now, than at literally any point in Jewish history? The Talmud literally forbids a Jew from getting a haircut from a non-Jew unless it's in front of a mirror. And you know why? Because back then, it was a realistic concern. In fact, a statistical likelihood that your average heathen would cut a Jew's throat given the chance. And as much as the constant influx of news tries to paint the picture of rampant anti-Semitism, I think we can agree that that is not the case anymore. So this Shabbat, on the anniversary of the final repeal of the Spanish Inquisition's anti-Semitic policy, let's reflect on our unique and exciting place in history. We're a hair's breadth away from Mashiach, and let's resolve to do all we can to bring the final redemption in the week ahead. Your Jewish Week is produced by Chabad.org, written and recorded by me, Rabbi David Paltiel. Theme music by Levi Kloshak.